two-day transportation seminar. My name is Jennifer Dill. I'm a faculty member in the School of Urban Studies and Planning, and along with Rob Bertini and Chris Monsieur, who are in Civil and Environmental Engineering and Planning, we help co-organize this weekly seminar. So those of you who haven't been here before, welcome. One sort of business thing before we go on is we do webcast these seminars live, and then we also archive them on the web, which is why we ask that you use the microphone in front of you if you're going to ask a question, and just hold down on the touch area and keep the red light lit while you're asking your question, so the people listening on the web can hear your question in addition to the answer. And I do encourage you, if you haven't discovered this seminar on the web before, to go back and look on the website, because we have 2 years' worth of seminars archived on the web, and there's some pretty interesting talks on there. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Gary Spanovich, who is helped found the Wholistic Peace Institute, which is based here at PSU. Prior to that, he's done a number of things, including having been the Transportation Planning and Engineering Director for Clackamas County and being in charge of the Regional Transportation Plan at Metro. And so that indicates some of his transportation interests in the past. And his topic today is sort of combining these interests and talking about world cities in 2104. So without further ado.
Thanks, Jennifer. I think what I like to do is hold the questions till the end, and I'll try and get through the presentation, and then we'll have hopefully at least 15 minutes at the end for questions. This is an area I'm kind of deeply interested in, this issue of what cities are going to evolve like over the next 100 years. And over the next 100 years, we're going to probably see some major changes. Just a little bit about the Wholistic Peace Institute. We're located, as Jennifer said, at Portland State University, just a block south of here. Primarily, we work with Nobel Peace Laureates, and so I've worked with 8 as of at this point, where I've been in meetings and conferences and things of that nature. And the Institute was founded really in practical purposes out of the Dalai Lama's visit to Portland. I've worked in India for humanitarian causes since 1992, built a school for street children there in 95 with Rotary funds, and then began working with the Tibetan refugees. Previously, when I worked at Metro, I worked real closely with Senator Hatfield. He was chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee on funding, and that's where I knew him from. So our mission is basically to reduce violence in the world, because we think if you can focus on the areas of the world where our greatest potential for nuclear exchange might occur, that's where your greatest potential for killing is. And those 2 areas right now, in our view, are the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in the Middle East and the Korean conflict on the Korean Peninsula. So you might ask, how did I get involved in this issue of world cities in 2104 and a planner and world peace and Nobel Peace Laureates? But when the Dalai Lama came, I was part of the planning committee, and we decided to make his focus on, the theme of his visit, how can we achieve world peace? And so we invited 5 other Nobel Peace Laureates. We had the conference here at Portland State. Senator Hatfield co-moderated it. And we made that the theme of that conference, how can we bring compassion into the diplomatic peace-seeking process? So our conferences, I've been working on a conference in the Middle East for 2 years now. I believe probably in 2006 it'll come to fruition. We'll have it at one day at Truman Peace Center at Hebrew University in Israel, and second day at a Palestinian university in Bethlehem. We're working on one in Seoul and then also Mexico City. And then down the road a little bit, we see conferences in New Delhi and Taipei. And all these conferences are focused on where there's a potential for nuclear exchange. Because if you can get the countries talking, if you can present a new approach, you have some chance. Kind of bear with me on this peace stuff, but it's kind of part of the kind of how we evolved, you know, how I will kind of frame this issue of world cities in 2104. But in a nutshell, we have a four-step process. We do a holistic peace study, which really means taking a human approach to world peace. So holistic and human are the same thing. How can we bring a more human solution to a complex problem? The second, we hold a World Peace Conference with 6 to 8 or more Nobel Peace Laureates in that part of the world. The third step is the Nobel Peace Laureates come out with their own action plan, their own view of how to bring peace to, say, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And then fourth, we start a Holistic Peace Institute in the university where we hold the conference. So we always hold these conferences in universities. And then the purpose of that institute would be to implement what the Nobels come out with. Because the Dalai Lama came in 2001, Senator Hatfield co-moderated it. This bringing of compassion into the diplomatic peace-seeking process was the dialogue of these 6 Nobel Peace Laureates, and we published a book on it, and then we have a quarterly newsletter we put out. Other institute initiatives, we worked with Mrs. Kitzhaber when the Dalai Lama came, and we had a Dalai Lama's Youth Summit where we brought 8,000 students to the Coliseum, and he gave them a talk on nonviolence. And I've followed up with that momentum. I've had 2 student peace summits, about 500 students and teachers at 2002 and 2003, and brought a Nobel Peace Laureate as our keynoter. And we've just started a project with the Oregon Department of Education, the state, school system, to look at 5 pilot high schools to initiate a student peace society and begin to teach some of these Nobel Peace Laureate kind of their framework for bringing peace to students on how to make schools safer. And the state has said if we can kind of statistically prove that either students feel safer in these schools or the schools are actually safer, they'll implement this program statewide either next year or the year after. So we have a certain amount of momentum with that. I have a BSBA from University of Florida, a Master of Science in Planning with a specialty in transportation planning from Florida State. And then I did work on a PhD in the 80s here. I didn't finish it, but thinking about returning. I've worked in the United States, United Kingdom, Singapore, India, Lebanon. I'm on the faculty, actually, adjunct faculty of 3 universities, communication departments at Marylhurst for 12 years. I teach a class on building world peace at the University of Portland once a year, and then I actually teach some class on refugee camps and international health at Western Oregon. I do have a book I've written on how to use a holistic approach in planning and decision-making situations, and Dalai Lama did write a 2-page foreword for it, so hopefully that'll help me get the book published. He likes the holistic approach. He says holistic approach is a good approach, and I'm a good guy, so there you go. But anyway, these are a number of the books. I do have a book of gentleness I wrote. It's for I've taught at the Religion and Philosophy Department at Marylhurst for years, and so it's a textbook there. The book I mentioned, How to Achieve World Peace, 6 Nobel Peace Laureates answer the question. The holistic approach I just mentioned, and I do have a manual on how to use this approach. So, getting right to the issues, in 1900 there were 1.65 billion people on the earth. On October 12th, 1999, 99 years later, we reached the 6 billion people mark. And all these figures are from the United Nations. So all my figures are from basically United Nations. They're United Nations figures. The highest world growth rate in the 60s, worldwide population, was 2.04%. Currently, it's 1.3%. So fertility and aging of the population is moving down the growth rate. So it's not growing, it's growing less in terms of the increment each year. Currently, 78 million people are added to the planet each year. And of these, 95% live in undeveloped regions. The percentage living in less developed regions worldwide in 1900 was 70%, 2000 80%, 2050 it will be 90%. So the population growth is in the less developed areas. World life expectancy in 1950 was 45. In 2050, it's predicted to be 76 years old worldwide, even in the, no matter what worldwide average. The planet, so to speak, is becoming increasingly urban. In 2000, 46% live in urban areas. The UN is predicting by 2006, they use the word majority, a majority of the world's population will be urbanized. So people, if you look 100 years out, people will live in urban areas. So whether those urban areas are suburban or large, dense urban areas or somewhere between, they'll be urban. So it's the natural order of these trends. People will come together in cities, and how we service cities, how we think about them, how we govern them, if we're able to govern them, how we pay for infrastructure. These are huge issues. Let's see, 2013, the UN's predicting 7 billion, 2028, 8 billion, 2054, 9 billion, and then 2200, 10 billion. And so the United Nations is saying between 2054 and 2200, the growth rate on the planet slows down significantly and more or less stabilizes at 10 billion people roughly in 2200. Let's see. These are kind of fertility curves worldwide, and they basically go down. So fertility and the aging of the population are kind of the prime factors for that stabilization. Percentage distribution of world population. In 1900, well, the one that really speaks to me is Asia. 57% of the world's population was in Asia in 1900, and then it will go up slightly, down slightly, and more or less end in 2050 at 57%, whereas North America and Europe are a shrinking or stable population. So most of the world's people are going to live in Asia. And so the Asian world cities are going to be perhaps the largest world cities and the largest number of huge cities. And so I work still a little bit with economic issues and things of that nature. And whenever I get a chance to say to people or to policymakers, I say, Oregon's future is in Asia. We are a small speck on a pond where the majority of the world's population live, and where we have actually a very growing Asian population in Oregon. And so when we think about work and market and this and that, we need to think about Asia, because that's where the momentum is. So what are the major trends we might have to confront in 2104? Large cities will become megacities in 100 years. Today, roughly 27 million people live in Mexico City. That's usually considered the largest city in the world. Not that there aren't more dense cities. Singapore, for example, and Macau and Hong Kong, I believe, are the three densest cities in the world, although they don't have anywhere near that population. So what these trends say to me, and in using my own experience, is I've drawn the conclusion that we can expect at least 10 world cities with a population of over 50 million in 100 years. So 50 million people in a city could become ungovernable, unserviceable. Today's understanding of how we look at cities and how we approach them and how we service them might not even exist, so there might have to be an evolution of philosophy. We don't know if there will be post-Holocaust events to heal. I worked on a project in Lebanon a few years ago, a garden of forgiveness, a 5-acre garden, personal contemplative garden to heal the wounds of the civil war that happened in Lebanon. And give or take the Syrian and Israeli excursion into Lebanon, 180,000 people died in that civil war, and more or less, the shooting just started one day, and more or less, the shooting just stopped one day. So you can almost say there was a bit of a phenomenon there. There's no real clear answer why they started killing each other to that extent and why they stopped. But there's a body of literature out there that calls cities like that post-Holocaust. What do you do with them? How do you heal them? Because when a city's population has been traumatized like that, you have to do something special. So just a thought on that. So how will we, as planners, architects, engineers, respond to that? What new phenomena will we as urban designers have to deal with? Potentially fossil fuel has run out. I've seen for years reports 2025, 2050. Kind of the end of oil as we know it. Not that it wouldn't exist, but it could be so expensive to get to after that that it might be as if it didn't exist. And you see the market today. You know, when I got my master's in transportation planning in '74, there wasn't anything in the market like hybrid cars today. So you're seeing the phenomenon of the reduction in fuel today. Manufacturers are coming out with hybrid cars to get 40, 50 miles an hour a gallon because the possibility of this reduction in fuel is becoming present. Another reason for that I've read is that the Chinese economy, 1.3 billion people, is just booming. And so that boomingness, they have this voracious appetite for oil as we did. And so they are consuming a great deal. And to the extent the undeveloped countries try to emulate our lifestyle, you know, with our car ownership, the average car ownership in the United States is 1.9, I believe. So every household has 1.9 cars. Today, the average car ownership in Indonesia is 0.1. But so you can imagine if Indonesia and those countries, and they would love to have that car ownership, but the implications for fuel and air pollution. And I've spent a lot of time in India, mostly with those humanitarian projects, but I can remember we were trying to get out of New Delhi's airport to go to some place kind of to the east. And we got at the airport at 6. Plane was supposed to arrive at 7. We waited at the airport till 6 in the evening because the fog and the pollution was so dense, there was no planes taking off or coming. And there was another time I remember when I was in New Delhi, and at 9 o'clock in the morning, I remember just moving. I looked at my hand, and it was kind of foggy, but I could see it. But by about 5 o'clock, when I put my hand out like that, I could not see my hand. So, and that New Delhi is not the most polluted city in the world. Supposedly 3 cities in China are. So the fossil fueled automobile, there are other constraints than oil. You know, there's the air pollution issues and et cetera, et cetera. So the other issue I've seen is clean water. Clean water, I've seen reports that by 2050 it becomes scarce, even in the United States. Radioactive storage, urban violence, civil unrest. So these are kind of issues that we have to think about for world cities in 100 years and also form a basis for this issue of transportation aspects. So with a mega city of 50 million, it's never been on the planet before, how would we create a sense of community? Would we have neighborhoods? How would they be governed? Would the justice system still function? Or if the criminal law system relies on overwhelming force, it could eventually cease to function because you create such a cycle of revenge that goes out of control. And that's kind of what you have in the Middle East to some extent. And so we see the real world experience consequences of that today. Would traditional dispute resolution methods work? Would these cities grow up, or would they grow out? How would we distribute natural resources? Where would we find funds for the infrastructure? I mean, these are basic questions we need to think about and ask over the next, as we look at 100 years out. So are we off course with our cities? This issue about, have we created a healing city, a good city in a sense? And I always use the metaphor of an airplane, with the politician being the pilot, the urban planner being the navigator, sounding the bells in a sense when we're off track, the citizens being the passengers. And one time on one flight from Madras to Bangkok, 12 midnight till 6 a.m. So you think, boy, you kind of sleep. But Indian planes sometimes aren't, not a lot of amenities. They welded the seats in a bolt upright position. That was the most uncomfortable night I've ever spent in my life. But the point being, using that metaphor on our cities, do they become livable, let alone sustainable? Is the 100-story building a dinosaur after September 11th? Should it be? Will world tourism grow or diminish? All that has implications for urban planners, cities, and transportation issues. I mentioned the issue in Beirut. So is your planning an urban design practice, or will it be? Will you be able to factor in social, communication, accessibility, and other issues? Because all these issues are interconnected. They're all interdependent. What new tools will you use? What new philosophies? There's a book called The Fifth Discipline. It was published a number of years ago. And he's a management professor at MIT. And in fact, I think he's chair of the department. And basically, he says the mind-heart intuition connection is kind of missing today, and he offers 300 pages on how to get it back. And so he's a very learned man. So there's a need for human approaches and human views of these problems and human solutions, and that's kind of one of the reasons I started the holistic approach in the Peace Institute. We had 1904, a letter mailed from Portland to London would take weeks to arrive. You couldn't call London. There were no radios, computers, TV. Horses and walking were still the main mode of transportation. Skyscraper had not arrived. The largest world city was small by today's standards. Today, letter mailed from Portland to London arrives within 24 hours. Calling London takes 1 minute. Radios, computers, TVs. You have 80-story plus buildings planned. So dramatic change in 100 years. And dramatic population increase, 1.6 billion to 6 billion. Dramatic change. So when I think about 2104, I think about an optimistic scenario, and then I think about a pessimistic scenario. So my view of how to begin to think about it is to develop alternative scenarios. Optimistic scenario might be we've found new ways to facilitate citizens respecting each other and kind of working together. There are new community building tools in place, because remember, it's not about infrastructure. It's about 50 million people being able to live with themselves and together in a space. And that space requires sewer, water, housing, transportation. But it's at its core how can that many people live together as human beings? We've found new ways to communicate and use virtually no fossil fuel. It could be that the reality of the future in terms of transportation are cameras. So in a sense, a virtual world is created with these video cameras, and everything's on camera, and everything can be tuned in, which would, in a sense, minimize travel and still allow for some communication at some human level. Let's see. Just go on. A pessimistic scenario for 2104 is that we go backwards. A letter mailed from Portland to London takes a week because the mail system doesn't function well. Calling London takes days. Phone lines are down. Blackouts, electricity blackouts. We might be able to travel at the speed of sound more like we do today, but it might take a year's salary. The tallest building could be 150 stories. The 10 largest world cities have a combined population of over 500 million and become, basically, we're not in balance. When we think about the air pollution constraint, when we think about the natural resources to power our travel, when we think about the ability to get along, road rage, for example, then we see a much more pessimistic scenario. So there's two choices here. And so the question is, how do we move towards that more favorable scenario? And how do we make sure we don't move towards the negative? I mean, what will it take? And to some extent, urban planners, transportation planners, are key in that, key. So what could we do to design an optimistic scenario? I would suggest realization of our interdependence. In the past, I think dependence was maybe the basic philosophy. The serfs were dependent on the king. There was dependence when you look back over the last 1,000 years. This last 300 or 400 years, especially, our country has been focused on the philosophy independence. We're independent. We can create our own life and reality. And that's had its role. But I think the philosophy of the next 100 years is our realization that we are all interdependent. And something we do or don't do here will affect somebody 3,000 miles away. And so understanding that philosophy and applying it becomes key. That's where I believe the holistic approach comes in. It could be that an urban peacemaking process becomes one of the most important things in urban planning in 50 or 60 years. A little bit about the holistic approach. The root word for holistic is holos. It's a Greek word, and it means to heal or to make whole. In a sense, a holistic approach in transportation planning means let's not just look at cars or buses or VMT or infrastructure. Let's always go to the human being. The human being is trying to move from this place to this place, school, work, shopping, and how can we give him or her a human experience, a whole experience? And if we focus only on the car, only on the VC ratio, only on the VMT, only on the infrastructure, we miss something. So we have to go back to that. We always have to keep coming back to the human being and the human solution. And as a way of kind of understanding wholeness in this planning and decision-making context, a human being has basically 4 dimensions. Physical dimension, we have a body. Emotional dimension, we have feelings. Mental dimension, we have thoughts. And spiritual or intuitive dimension, which is kind of not easily, let's say, quantified, but enough people, the majority of the people on the earth kind of have some sense about that. So when we look at transportation, the building of the physical system is one, but only one aspect. the emotional dimension. We have to think about that, because if we don't think about that, road rage wasn't much of a phenomenon 20 years ago. It's more now, and it may be incredibly worse 50 years from now. And I remember when I was in urban planning school, they talked about putting rats together, and then if you keep increasing the density, they eventually become, in a sense, insane or cannibalistic. But we've never really seen that in cities. But when I think about road rage, I think about that body of knowledge or that theory, which is where we've experienced our densest experiences on highways, 1 or 2 hours sitting in traffic. So you begin to see some impact there. So over the last 2 years, I've been working in Rome. I've been wanting to do this conference at the University of Rome. So I've, thanks to Mayor Katz's support, I've had a nice contact with the mayor of Rome. And then the mayor of Rome and Mikhail Gorbachev are friends, and they have an event, a Nobel event they do every year in November. But they also do something called a Global Forum twice a year, where they bring together Nobel Peace Laureates, President of the World Bank, United Nations organizations, mayors from 60 cities around the world, youth, musicians, and they have a 2-day forum, global plus local, and they try and determine what Rome is going to look like over the future and what they need to worry about. And they come out with papers on urban sustainability, urban ecology, and world peace. So they put all those concepts together and create kind of a view of the future. And it's that experience with that has kind of got me working on this. So I've been working on this little body of research for a year, but that's kind of where it came from. We know there are finite resources on the earth, and if we don't replenish them, if we take more than we replenish, the bank account's going to be gone soon. And if the bank account's gone, you don't create water, you don't create fuel, the ability of the earth to cleanse itself of severe air pollution. So these are major scenarios that have to be built into our 100-year look. And each of those systems needs to be sustainable. And so visioning and tapping kind of the collective wisdom of the population has to be part of that process. So how do we start a new approach? How we look at things differently? I would say emphasize the relationship, not the project or the endpoint. Let the project serve the relationship. And Frank Gehry, that world-famous architect, he had a conversation with him once, and he kind of emphasized that to me. Usually when I meet Nobel laureates or famous people, I ask them things. How can world peace be achieved? How can we make cities more? And they always have an answer, and you'd be surprised, kind of fascinating answers that come back. Create the vision for the future and let the vision lead. Always build a community around your vision. And I would say use compassion as your underlying value, because it really emphasizes our interdependent nature. I'm going to skip this and kind of go right to some of the statistics a little bit, and then I'll wrap up. So today, U.S. population, 294 million, 1 U.S. birth every 8 seconds, 1 new U.S. migrant every 24 seconds. So 1 net gain every 11 seconds a person either moves to or is born in the United States. Top 5 most populous countries in 1950, China, 562 million. Today, roughly 50 years later, 1.3 billion. India, 370 million in 1950. Today, almost 1.1 billion. U.S., 152, 294. You see Russia and Japan in 1950, but you don't see them in 2004. They've been replaced by Indonesia and Brazil. So today, these are the top 5 most populous countries. In 2050, comparing today's top 5 to 2050's, India will be the largest country in the world, 1.6, China 1.4, U.S. will go to 420, Indonesia, Nigeria. So Indonesia and Nigeria are pretty poor countries today. They may not be in 50 years because they may have, I guess you could say, economic miracle. A little bit on VMT. Urban VMT in 1980 in the United States was 855,265 millions. Today it's 1.7, so it's more or less doubled in 20 years. Rural VMT's not quite doubled. Let's see, so we basically have had an 87% increase in the last 22 years of VMT. And that's more cars, more air pollution, more travel. It's hard to, the United States DOT publishes great statistics on households and VMT and travel. The other countries don't. The one that I found that published the most was Indonesia. But India, China, they don't really have any travel statistics that I could find, I guess I should say. So the U.S. will go from 294 million to 543 million in 2104. 85% population increase. So we could see almost a 5-fold increase in VMT if we keep the same level of travel. That would have horrendous consequences, quite frankly. Again, 1.9 vehicles per household, 1.8 drivers. So we own more cars per household than we have drivers to use them. So there's a third car, so there's 2 people in the household and each drive, but there's a third car sitting there and it works, but nobody drives it. Maybe they drive it a couple times a year. So we have travel automobile ownership to excess, unlike any other country in the world. In Indonesia, with 239 million, a little bit less than us today, they have 361,000 road miles, 22 million total vehicles, and 0.1 vehicles, in this case, per person. I had said household before. So there's not very many people that have cars in Indonesia. But having worked in Southeast Asia, I can guarantee they would all like a car. If they had the opportunity, they would do it just like we did. So in 2104, in 100 years, Indonesia will go to 614 million in population. And if we just use that percentage increase, we could assume that increase in road miles and total vehicles. But what if they had the same rates as the United States in 100 years? And assuming we had the same rates we do today, then they wouldn't have 36 million total vehicles. They have 584. And if you look at every undeveloped country and you add that in, worldwide, it becomes, in a sense, untenable. Possibilities for 2104 transportation planning solutions. I would think practically that everything would need to more or less function in cyberspace. If there's no fuel or significantly less fuel because of air pollution constraints, no funds for building infrastructure, then I could see where you'd have the use of cameras everywhere and the ability to tap into those cameras just like you tap into the internet today, so that the cameras are not, I would hope it's not for security, and we evolve into an Orwellian view, but more the use of cameras for practical purposes of travel and commuting, so that we could in a second dial up a meeting, perhaps with people all over the world, and have that meeting. And then there's an outcome to the meeting, but there's no travel involved in having the meeting. So that was the thinking. There may not be any paper products for a variety of reasons. majority of people may work from home. I'll just kind of finish up. These are just the last few slides, and I thought you might be interested in some of these world large projects I've worked on as an urban planner. And I'm working with Lama Zopa Rinpoche in India, and he's building the largest statue in the world. It's a 500-foot statue. It'll be the size of the Pink Building here in downtown Portland. And basically, the Buddha made a prophecy 2,500 years ago and said that 1,000 people will achieve enlightenment in a certain phase. So this kind of, you could say, is religious philosophy, Buddhist religious philosophy. But he's been able to raise $200 million to build a statue, and it's now being planned in Kuchinagar, India, surrounded by a 300 or 400 acre World Peace Garden. And so it will become a main pilgrimage site for the world, just like Mecca to the Muslim religion and Jerusalem to the Christian religion. So I've been to this city. There isn't any, there's no airport. There's 3 hotels. There is there's no train. There's just a bus and taxi, and it was a 16-hour bus ride. Taxi ride. So it's a huge infrastructure program that the Indian government has initiated there. And I've been talking to them for about a year now about my role in doing a land use plan, because the governor has said, if you prepare a land use plan with a 16-kilometer circle around the statue to preserve and protect it so you don't have 7-Elevens and hot dog stands, so it becomes, in a sense, truly a pilgrimage site, I'll enact that into law. So they have some opportunities there. This 5-acre Garden of Forgiveness in downtown Beirut I mentioned. When we had our peace conference here prior to, I work with Marassi Landscape Architects on that, but we took the model over to Senator Hatfield's office, and he mentioned just some intuitive feeling to have him look at it. And he mentioned that he was one time offered the presidency of American University in Beirut. Excuse me. And at one time, he just finished the governorship, 2 terms, and that came up, and so he's trying to decide whether to run for the U.S. Senate or take the presidency. And he decided to run for the Senate. But he thought seriously about it. So he said, why don't you have a peace conference here when they open the garden, since you're working on it? And so I said, that's a good idea. So we invited the chair of the garden here, and we had a meeting with a number of people from the city, planning director, and she and I started a planning process of having the conference that next year, the next peace conference in Beirut, with Shimon Peres and Yasser Arafat as the 2 Nobel keynoters, because they won the '93 Nobel Peace Prize. But then the violence started, and it wasn't an option, in a sense. I have been promoting this idea of a World Peace Garden somewhere in Portland, and there seems to be some momentum gaining over the last few months in the South Waterfront area, because it's a new area that's being planned. I did work on, after the Dalai Lama left, a foundation donated a 10-acre parcel of land by the zoo, and we wanted to build a Tibetan Peace Center there, and hopefully when it's built, bring the Dalai Lama back. And he does a large 10-day ceremony. It's called a Kali Chakra, and he does it to promote world peace. And so our thought was we could bring him back, and when that's done, and then you could do that ceremony. I am working with the Paiute Indian tribe down in Shears, Nevada. And Wovoka was he's called the ghost dance leader, but he lived 1860 to 1930. And I won't go into detail, but I'm working with Senator Harry Reid down here, and the tribe and him are trying to get earmarked funds to build a museum, basically a world-class Native American museum. Just two last slides. We are going to have a summer Nobel Peace Institute here at PSU, June 20th to 24th. We're bringing Dr. Schultz. He's executive director of Amnesty, and he won the Nobel Peace. Amnesty won the 77 Nobel Peace Prize. PSU will give credit, and you can take it for non-credit if you have interest. In addition, Rabbi Stamfer, Father Claude Parmelo, he runs the Peace Studies Department at UP. And then Dr. Robert June, he's the fellow I'm working with on the Korea Conference. We'll all be teaching, so 1 week class in a sense. Theme will be human rights in a sense. And then I do have, for those interested in the holistic approach, on the last Monday of the month at a restaurant in Tualatin in Sushi World, from 6 to 8 we have a dinner, and if you want to know more about the holistic approach, you're welcome to come and have dinner, and we just chat. And I guess that's it. So, any questions? Sure. Have to push the button there. Thanks.
Given some notable failures of people to predict, say, population or food supply long into the future, what do you think is some of the benefits for really looking 100 years ahead? Right. I mean, so many of the things in previous times where, resources have been said to run out, and they turn not to run out, or
right.
other things have happened.
Well, Metro, our Portland's regional agency, about 10 years ago, was it, went through a future forecasting process that came out with their 2040 plan. They're now going through a process of relooking at 2040 and trying to understand what the next evolution is. And would that be 2080, 2050, or would it be 2100? And so they see some value in basically thinking about it in those terms, and they may well pick a 100-year time frame. I think that when I graduated in 74 with my master's in transportation planning from Florida State, 68 was when the EPA started. And so there was a great sense of hopefulness about environmental issues, and it's had a huge positive impact. But we had not. We could not envision a future without oil. It was still too far in the future. It was just way out there. But today, it's not that far, and so we can look 25 or 30 years, and it's not clear what the political consequences. It may be so expensive to get out of the ground, it's diminishing, and in order to get it, we might have to, the political issue of dwelling in the Arctic Wildlife Refuge, we might have to drill in Forest Park. You know what I'm saying? We might have to go. If we follow that scenario, and oil becomes everything, then it may not matter where it's at. We just have to get it. And so that's almost addictive. But these scenarios and thinking about that resource need to be part of our planning process. Clean water is another issue. The air pollution. Air pollution isn't that bad in this country because of EPA and our rules, but it's horrible in China and India. It's very bad there. And I can't tell you how many times I've been in a taxi in India, and I'm sitting there, and we're in traffic, and it takes 2 hours to get from some place. And I'm sitting in a taxi, and there's these huge lorry drivers, huge trucks, and there's an exhaust pipe right at my eye level on that window, and it's just spewing smoke. And I've got the windows rolled up, and but you can't escape it, in certain situations there. So we have to think about our limits. We have to just think about it with a new philosophy. That's what I would say.
The population projections, are they a high, medium, or a low?
They let me see. it's a recommended one. Although in forming the recommendation, they did look at high, medium, low. But this summary report that I used did not provide reams and reams and reams of data on what high looks like, medium looks like. It's their learned opinion, this is what it will be. But I'm sure they have it. So you just have to check the United Nations webpage, especially the United Nations UNDP webpage. That's where you can find it.
When you were talking about the concept of holism as human, it got me thinking about a friend of mine who's in Rwanda right now, working there, and she said that pretty much everyone she knows, their consciousness seems to be so drastically altered, so different from what she's ever experienced before because of the genocide they've experienced.
Right.
And I'm kind of curious about how you would guess that or estimate the human consciousness will be like in 100 years, given all this this prophetic talk that you've been giving,
Sure.
and this kind of this dark days ahead.
Yeah.
What do you think people will be like? Will they be drastically different? And I guess, kind of leading off that, do you generally take the optimistic or the pessimistic approach in your two sides that you gave?
I generally take the optimistic approach because I think the human spirit is indefatigable, that the human spirit will always triumph out of whatever the situation. That's kind of just maybe a hopefulness or faith. But all the major world's religions, Muslim, Buddhist, Christian, have prophetic aspects to it, and they make prophecies are there. Now, I don't, that's useful for us as a personal practitioner of a religion or faith. It's not necessarily useful for us as a professional or, planner working with more in a secular way, for a variety of reasons. But I think we don't need to look beyond our basic common sense, Just common sense, just logic, just what the reports and the studies from UN, UNDP, and all the other world organizations have been saying for years. And if we just so our focus tends to be, what's this VC ratio for this intersection, for this development now? We're done, the study's done, we get our check and we move on. That's wrong thinking. That's not the way to do it. Not that you can bring in some of these issues into that kind of situation, but some of us and our institutes, because we do have institutes, and that's the purpose of institutes and universities. Lech Walesa, former president of Poland, I asked him once, how will world peace be, achieved? And he said, in the universities, not in street demonstrations, because the universities, we need creative solutions, and that's where you're going to find them. And he says street demonstrations aren't useful for that. So that's why the Nobel Peace Laureates, I think, are, for me, an inspiration, because they've all have a very inspiring story, and they have foundations and institutes, and working with them has been kind of a blessing. Thanks. The lady there?
The population projections showed most of the current developed countries like North America and Europe as balancing off, and that it's the currently underdeveloped populations that are really going to be escalating as they're moving towards urbanization.
Yeah.
Well, what point do you think, this is looking really far down the line, that the whole world is fairly urbanized and that there's not the cultural differences, and do you think that then those populations will drop back down the way that Europe and North America have?
Yeah, and that's exactly what their numbers are saying. And I think, and that the way you put it is actually a pretty good way to put it, which is how can we kind of work together as kind of one whole. And so it will take us thinking about that. So we really have to go out of our way to know that our team, so to speak, is not just our own culture or our own city. It's the whole, all the people. So you have to kind of steel yourself or prepare yourself to think differently. and to evolve your own philosophy from these basic principles of interdependence and holism and things of that nature. And if you do that, if you kind of make a personal commitment to that, you'll come up with some very creative solutions, and you'll begin to evolve the application. But still, common sense and logic will kind of get you there. And also, I have business cards of both the Institute and also I have a consulting practice too. You're welcome to take one, and you can send me an email if you want to know more about this dinner or anything. So just to let you know, that's in the blue shirt there.
Curious as to your thoughts of our current involvement in the Middle East and how conflict resolution will occur in the future as some of our geopolitical goals are achieved over there.
I think the roots of the violence in the Middle East, whether it's Iraq, Afghanistan, Lebanon, Syria, they're all related to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. If we can somehow solve that conflict and bring peace to those two parties, so to those two countries, then peace, in my view, will spread out like a warm blanket over the whole Middle East. And if we can't find a way to bring peace to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and again, that's a major focus for our institute and the Nobels I've been working with, then I think there's so much hate in the Middle East that sooner or later the Muslim world will acquire a nuclear bomb. And if that bomb goes off, it's going to go off potentially in Israel. And if it goes off in Israel, they have nuclear. We don't know where the conflagration will stop. I don't believe if it occurs, it will be regional in nature because of the fallout and things of that nature. Mikhail Gorbachev's a fascinating man. He had what you'd call like an epiphany after Chernobyl. Because when Chernobyl happened, for 2 years, you could not drink the milk in Ireland because the strontium-90 levels were so high. So they milked the cows, but they wasted the milk. 2 years, could not. So we had no impact, but the Europeans had a huge impact from Chernobyl. And so he started an organization called Green Cross to work for environmental peace and justice. And I think it's at Boston College But anyway, so that's be my answer. So the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the key to peace in the whole Middle East. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. Mm-hmm. Right. Right.
I'm curious in your discussions with people around the world, what you've had around
Yeah. Well, I like the hybrid cards. I think it's a great trend. And, is it Levins who's at the Rocky Mountain Institute? He's been talking about hybrid cars and that technology I heard him 15 years ago. So there's been a body of knowledge promoting it. And now the market is actually kind of taking it on. But when I think about those cars in New Delhi or Indonesia or Malaysia or Thailand, there's not a lot of air pollution equipment on them because there's not a lot of money to either require it or to create it. They're pretty basic pieces of transportation. So, and boy, it's tough for us to tell another country to not live like us so we can continue to live like we do. It doesn't sell. In fact, it makes enemies, quite frankly. And but if you, Tom Schwab, he's a retired traffic engineer from ODOT, and I've worked with for years. We once had this discussion, and I talked about kind of how could we limit auto usage. And it's almost like the Wild West. You can't do it. Trying to tell people they can't have more than one car is like telling them it kind of violates some constitutional right, even though it doesn't. And Singapore, I worked in Singapore in 74, 75 when they started their area licensing scheme. And my last trip there, visit some friends, my friends have family, 4 kids. They were in high school. All the kids lived at home. And they had just sold their car. And cars are $50,000 to $60,000 in Singapore because it's just real expensive. Gas is $5 a gallon. And every 5 years they had to get a new license. And that license cost $50,000. So they had to give the government $50,000 every 5 years in order, not for the car, but just the ability to use the car. And so they decided that they just had enough. So they didn't renew the license, they sold the car. But Oli said to me the downside of that is with 6 people in the family, if they went to a restaurant or something, they couldn't just take one taxi, they had to take 2 taxis because you can only have a certain number of people in the taxi. You know, so it's complicated. It's all complicated. But if you use public transportation, then it's not, but of course travel time's longer.
So we're out 1 o'clock.
Okay. Okay. Sure. Sure. Feel free to email me, take a card, and you're welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Hi. Oh, good. Thank you.
I didn't get a chance to ask a question, but
Okay.
do you ever look like